Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on circularity and packaging and circularity and where to from here. We've got three brilliant speakers today. I'll introduce them all in a second. We've got one of our speakers online, so hopefully she'll be joining us. Hi, Alison.
Hello.
Well, where are you today, Alison?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Perfect. So good morning to you.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little introduction. As we're all running a bit late, we can carry on for another hour, is that right? So today we're just looking at shifting customer preferences and how they have an influence on packaging. We've seen that lots of people are taking on board sustainability, taking on board net zero, taking on board circularity, and that will indeed impact how and what people want to consume or indeed purchase. So we have three brilliant speakers from large companies that are going to explore how companies have adapted more sustainable packaging solutions and where do the innovations lie in the future. Just to introduce myself, I'm David Greenfield. I'm the Vice President of the Circular Economy Institute, a volunteer network of 280 clubs around the world. If you're interested in any training, do have a look at us. I'm also run three businesses, all in circularity. Etsor, which is a venture studio, Sonex, which is a research and innovation practice, and Tech Takeback, which is a practical not-for-profit reuse and recycling system for tech. But it's not about me today, it's about these speakers. So I'm going to introduce each of them very, very briefly, just by their name. And I'm going to ask each of them to just give a few minutes of some of their talking points on the topic, and then open it up to yourselves and a couple of pre-prepared questions that I have. We have 40 minutes, so please do use Slido. I will be going for the questions which have got the most votes, unless they're really acerbic. So do use that. And I'd like to introduce Joe Francis, who's the Vice President of Sustainability at Coca-Cola Europe Partners. Euro-Pacific Partners, sorry, Joe. To just give a few thoughts, and then we'll come to Alison. Joe.
Sure. Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks for asking me to join. It's been a fantastic discussion today. I guess my starting point is when we think about packaging, maybe just 2 seconds about our business. So we're one of the largest global Coca-Cola bottlers. Our people, we've got about 33,000 of them. They make, move, and sell Coca-Cola products, Coca-Cola's brands, across 29 different markets. We're serving a consumer population of about 600 million consumers, so it's a fairly substantial operation. Lots of focus on packaging. I want to connect it back to the core theme of today. We've spent a lot of time talking about carbon and the value chain. So for us, when we think about our total Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, packaging is about 40%. So when you think about the total carbon emissions of the business, getting the carbon footprint of our packaging down is absolutely key. We won't hit our science-based 2030 targets. We won't get anywhere close to net zero unless we focus on packaging. We're pretty clear that within our packaging, so when you look at our packaging mix, we've got a whole range of different types of packaging. I know you'll talk about Tetra Pak. We don't use that much Tetra Pak. We've got a lot of cans. We've got a lot of plastic bottles that are both single-use. We've actually got some refillable PET. We've got a lot of glass, both refillable glass and also some one-way glass. We've done a lot of work to look at the carbon footprint across all of those different pack types. The key starting point is we've got to get every single one of those pack types to be a lower carbon footprint. And we're pretty clear that that includes a number of fairly straightforward strategies. I wish it really was straightforward to deliver, but it includes making sure that you start with recyclability. So you've got to start with the design piece. We're very fortunate when you look at cans or bottles that the vast majority of those packs are pretty much always recyclable. You then go directly to the collection, the getting it back, because there's no point in putting a pack onto the market that's recyclable if it doesn't come back. In Europe, about 70% of our bottles and cans do come back, and that's thanks largely to a fairly well-developed extended producer responsibility scheme set up that we've got in many markets, and in many markets in Europe, we've got well-designed deposit return schemes. We love to get deposit return schemes in all of our markets because that really will lead to more of that packaging coming back. And then critically, the last bit of that circular loop then is making sure that we're using as much recycled content in that pack as we possibly can. So if you think about plastic bottles, about 50% of the plastic that we use in Europe is already recycled content. We'd love to get to a position where we're using no fossil fuel-based virgin plastic at all. We think it's probably going to take us to the end of the decade to get there. And you then go right back to the beginning of the loop, because to be able to do that, you've got to get the packaging back in the first place. A lot of what we've done is invested very, very heavily in the rPET recycling infrastructure, paying a premium not just for the content, so sending a very strong demand signal, but then investing in the PET recycling infrastructure to transform that across a number of markets. It is definitely delivering change. A number of our markets are already at 100% rPET bottles in all the bottles that we produce. But at the same time, we've also got a plastic waste crisis surrounding us. And we know that PET is a part of that, but at the same time, we know if we get it right, a PET bottle actually, in a circular economy where it's collected and it's made out of 100% recycled PET, delivers a really low carbon footprint. May not be that obvious to many, but actually it does deliver a very competitive carbon footprint, even sometimes as competitive as a reusable solution. So maybe I'll end there just as an opening.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's really interesting and really insightful from your perspective. I'm going to go straight on to Alison, who is Vice President at Mars. Alison, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So I'm the Vice President of Global Packaging Sustainability at Mars, as previously at Coca-Cola and at Procter & Gamble, also working on packaging sustainability there. At Mars, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to transform over 12,000 different types of packaging so that they could be circular either in the infrastructure that exists today or the infrastructure that's likely to exist in the future. So we do look at the actual packaging and the infrastructure that it's going into. I do apologize that I'm not there in person today, but I'm at the World Wildlife Foundation's event for plastic policy and policies to address plastic pollution. So very relevant to the discussion today, and can bring some of the fresh thoughts into the discussion that we're having. So something I'm really excited about is we have now tied packaging sustainability quantifiably to executive compensation at Mars. And that drives really fast action when a part of an executive's bonus is tied to whether we deliver on, again, quantifiable, objective packaging sustainability targets, taking into account both the design that we're working on, as well as the infrastructure that we're developing our packaging into. Our portfolio is mostly flexible packaging. So if we look at the packaging, it's very efficient. We have the same revenue as Coca-Cola, but packaging is only about 4 to 8% of our GHG footprint, depending on the specific product. So it's very efficient. It's very lightweight, protects the product and is safe, but it has the end of life issue. So we have a very different problem from Coca-Cola. So we use very little packaging, but we need to figure out a way to drive circularity for the packaging that we do produce. And that is what I focus a lot on with, both the hundreds of associates who are working on this at Mars, as well as with the external infrastructure that we work with. We're really excited about the global treaty. So my other colleagues on stage here are also participants and active in the treaty. And we're really excited about what that can do in terms of setting a level playing field and bringing new both innovation as well as necessary legislation into the plastic space. And we can't forget about the people. So we often talk about climate, we often talk about packaging, but there's a big environmental justice and climate justice component to this. We have to respect the informal waste collection sector, as well as understand what the people impact is for the types of materials we're using. So we do take that into account as we look at our packaging strategy and sustainability holistically. And I'll leave that there.
Thank you very much, Alison. That's really, really interesting. And I think the packaging you were talking about is very different to the packaging both of you are talking about, but equally has some huge challenges. Thank you to the audience already. We've got 2 questions on Slido. So our final contributor for the panel is Ola Emquist from Tetra Pak. And Ola, you are the Vice President of Packaging Sustainability, I believe.
No, at all.
Vice President of Packaging Solutions, sorry.
Correct. No, it's fine. And I promised to be shorter than in the previous session, okay?
Yes.
Because I got the evil eye from
You've
David.
got the clock there.
Oh, that's very good. So, yes, I'm Ola Almqvist, and I'm responsible for the packaging business unit within Tetra Pak. And I've been working something like 30 years in the food processing and packaging industry. So talking about Tetra Pak, you know that we deliver food processing and packaging to mainly the liquid food industry, dairy, juice, plant-based, but we actually also do cheese, ice cream, milk powder installations for customers. Talking about this, I would like to start because our products that our customers normally pack are normally slightly different compared to, for example, what Coca-Cola packs. And they are extremely sensitive. And you have to be sure about the food safety and the food waste when you pack it. So that's a slightly different situation. And we all saw the IPCC report, and we have read maybe not all the 8,000 pages, but we have at least got summaries from it. So we know it's very serious, and we know that the food system in the world actually contributes 30% to the greenhouse gases, and the food waste is enormous. EU, okay, we're in the UK now, but within EU, 127 kilos per person per year is wasted. 1/3 of all food that is produced is wasted. So when we talk about circularity, I would like us not to forget what I just said about these things, that we have to protect the food. And so it's much more than only recycling, but it's also recycling. And when it comes to recycling, for sure, we see this as a huge need, and the beverage carton industry is investing heavily in setting up more infrastructure. So already spent 200 million euros on it and have committed to another 120 million euros up to 2027. And Tetra Pak, we are investing something like 40 million euros in recycling infrastructure moving forward. Why do we do that? Well, obviously, we do it because the recycling of our packages, it's a fragmented situation. In EU, much better than in the UK, for example. So we're doing big efforts in the UK to increase the curbside collection, for example. Then in the rest of the world, in certain countries, very high, in other countries, much lower. So that is something which we drive very hard for improving the recycling of the packages, because the packages are recycling if you have the right infrastructure in place. But of course, to drive this recycling, we also need policies. For us who are in the field, I think we all follow what's happening in the packaging waste regulation, which is now being established in EU. We welcome that very much, because we believe, yes, the industry has to be there, of course, and help. Yes, consumer awareness is needed and so on. But we also need policies to kind of kickstart everything that is being done. These policies, of course, needs to be science-based, evidence-based, and so on. And please, don't only look at the circularity, also look at the full climate impact when it comes to food waste and all of that. I think I stop here.
Thank you. No, that's a perfect.
That was okay, actually.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And actually, that has led nicely onto my first question, which is actually looking at terminology. So you've just mentioned, let's look at the wider than circularity. And I'd like to just ask all three of you very briefly, what is the best terminology for getting us to become carbon neutral? Is it carbon? Is it circularity? Is it SDGs? Is it net zero? Is it another term? Is there a financial term that we should be using? Alison, I'll start with you, just to get a perspective from Mars. What really gets your board going? You've already mentioned your scheme that you have there. Is that delivering, or do you need something else alongside that?
Yeah, and happy to talk. And I think what term we use really depends on what we're talking about, because I do really think they mean different things. Circularity addresses one thing, right, with the circular economy, and net zero is about the greenhouse gas and carbon that we're putting out. But there is a very big Venn diagram overlap between the two. So a lot of the actions that we're taking to drive circularity, using less material, using more recyclable material, and using more recycled content, like Joe mentioned, those all drive down carbon emissions. So there's a big intersect between there. But again, I don't think they're the same, and we do talk about them differently. And I completely agree, packaging has an outsized impact on greenhouse gases, and we can't ignore the potential. We should not use less packaging if we think it's going to create more food waste. That is an outsized impact, and it doesn't make sense. And we have to remember that when we're redesigning packaging, especially as we look at some of the reuse systems, which one, we're really excited about, but two, we also need to make sure, again, we're not introducing food waste or any issues around food waste and food quality when we look at packaging innovation.
Thank you, Alison. Would any of you like to add to that, or do you want to pick up the point that she just made about reuse? Do you want to add language or reuse, or both?
Let's go reuse. Language is, I mean, I on the language side, sustainability language generally is honestly is so confusing, and the amount of acronyms that sustainability professionals have to
Lots
deal
of
with.
TLAs.
Well, lots of acronyms, and honestly, when you're in front of execs and boards and trying to talk the difference between CSRD and TCFD, and I could just go on. I mean, so let's go reuse.
Perfect.
Much more interesting.
Well, let's go reuse, Joe. What are your views, what are Coca-Cola's views on reuse?
So I think a couple of things. First of all, we've got a really good, strong knowledge base within the global Coke system on reuse. So if you look at some of our markets, we've got a very, very strong refillable glass business, particularly in continental Europe. Giving one example of France. So in France, we've just switched all of our glass that was single use in our HoReCa business, so hotels, restaurants, bars, cafes. We've shifted all of that to refillable glass. We pretty much know that when you look at the carbon footprint of every single packaging type, the one that's the highest carbon footprint is single-use glass. That's really clear. So a single-use glass bottle has a far, far higher carbon footprint than any other single-use and certainly any reusable model. So to shift that to reuse as we've done in France is a really big deal. But you've got to have the infrastructure to do that. France, we had some refillable infrastructure, so that's been a really interesting move. In Germany, we've got refillable PET. So we've not in Europe, it's the only market where there's refillable PET. If you jump to some of our sister Coca-Cola bottlers in South America, they do use quite a lot of refillable PET. But again, the challenge with refillable PET is you've got to get it back. When you get into the nuance of all this, and there'll be a lot of people in the room who probably for their own businesses are undertaking product-based life cycle analysis. When you look at reuse, there's a real temptation to say reuse is always the best solution, right? And that's the kind of the simplistic answer. And in broad terms, it's probably correct, but there's huge buts. So if you think about a reusable glass bottle, if it's only reused twice or three times, actually it's no benefit because you're starting with a much heavier designed bottle in the first place. So you've got to get to a certain number of loops or trips, or we call it a trippage rate, a return rate. And then you've also got to make sure that bottle, as it's being returned, is not traveling an excessive distance. So we kind of internally talk about a 250 kilometer almost a break-even point. So if your bottle is traveling, the length of breadth, let's pick Norway, for example, that really doesn't make sense. And in those markets, and in some scenarios, actually, a single-use plastic bottle, if it is made from 100% recycled content, which is where we're at in many of our markets, and if you are in for example, a deposit return scheme environment for beverage packaging, where that pack is coming back again and again and again, actually from a carbon perspective, you might be getting to a very decent low carbon footprint, far lower than you might with a reusable scenario and that's a little bit counterintuitive for some people. But I think the future of our pack mix will definitely be a mix of single use but circular, and that's key. And we're the first to recognize the distance we have to travel in many markets to achieve that circularity. 30 seconds on Great Britain. 20 seconds on Great Britain, because we're in Great Britain. Great Britain has frankly huge challenges with recycling and collection. We still really hope that the Scottish government can deliver the deposit return scheme on time in August. We would have much preferred a UK-wide scheme that had the same scope with full interoperability, because Scotland going alone is definitely going to be challenging. But that then helps bring the packaging back. It helps provide high quality feedstock for us to use as recycled content, and you can get much closer to a circular economy. I point to the Nordics markets because that's kind of where they're at.
Interesting. And just picking up on that last point, interestingly, I think I saw an Edie this morning that Therese Coffey has actually suggested she would like a UK-wide DRS scheme, which is quite surprising, amongst many other things. But Ola, very briefly we'll move away from language. Let's go to take back and reuse.
I will take it a little bit short, since we spent quite a lot of time on it. But when you look at reuse, the way we see it is that reuse, yes, absolutely, but also there is a need for single-use beverage cartons or usage bottles. Why? Because I'm coming back to these highly nutritional, perishable liquid foods that are being packed. That is a completely different story, and food safety and food waste comes into play. And we pack basically 75% of everything. Now I take EU as an example. 75% of all the milk is packed in these type of packages, because it's food safe and because it reduces the food waste. So that is a little bit my take on it, that yes, you need both. But when it comes to what we deliver most on, plant-based, juices, milk, these highly nutritional, perishable foods, you have to be very careful what you do. So you need to do a full assessment of it. You need science-based, evidence-based when you take the decision. So we don't only look at the circular lens, but we take the full climate lens. And that's a much more difficult message to give. And that is what we are discussing and fighting about, and so on. So please take the full view. Then we are the first ones to say, let's go that direction.
And just picking up on that point in particular, I absolutely agree that we need to use science-based targets. I think there are a lot of people that will be going, okay, that's great, but who is producing the science-based targets? Is it yourselves as corporations, or is there, or should there be a third party that is responsible for quality assurance of that information to allow people to go, yeah, okay, I believe that. Alison, you were nodding. I'll go to you first.
Yeah, there's a lot of industry organizations coming together to determine what type of metrics we should be putting to reuse. So the World Economic Forum is leading to look at, how do we measure reuse? Is it by number of units? Is it by sales volume, return rates, like Joe was mentioning? And I think all of that is necessary. There's also a lot of work being done by a company called Resolve PR3 to look at standard setting and reuse. Often when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about waste management infrastructure, recycling infrastructure, but there's a major gap and a big opportunity for innovation in reuse infrastructure. So the infrastructure that's necessary, and it's shared infrastructure, because that's the only way it'll be successful. Shared infrastructure for reusable packaging to be taken back, the reverse logistics, washed, and then given back to the user. We're seeing this trend in society across multiple areas for blank as a service, right? We're seeing the ability to lease cars for a short period of time, scooters or bikes for a short period of time. We've seen software move to software as a service. And I really think there's an opportunity here to think about packaging as a service and what type of shared infrastructure you can have, again, to drive reuse. One really interesting economic factor, since we're at the Economist event, there's a concept called the reverse binomial distribution, where most marketers think and brands think that consumers buy our brands multiple times a year, where realistically, across brands, across countries, the majority of consumers really only buy your specific brand and product once or twice a year. And the rest of the time, they're buying a substitute product. Now, Coke might be one of the exceptions, but what that means, if we want reuse to work, where you need usually at least 10 turns to get some type of positive LCA, you need to have some type of shared infrastructure and shared packaging. And I completely agree with my fellow panelists on we really need to look at what categories reuse is best fit for. For instance, M&Ms and dry dog food might be better fit than wet cat food or Mars bars. So we really need to understand where reuse is applicable and invest collectively in that shared infrastructure and build that system together, as well as then apply the metrics to see if reuse is actually being successfully deployed and applied to the right products. We can't forget about the consumer, right? So we need to make it easy for the consumer, easy for them to return packaging and make it painless for them to use reusable packaging.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alison. Joe, you want to jump in on this as well, but also just taking a question from Slido, and thank you, Sarah, for raising this. We were discussing this before the session. How does this also impact with the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive that's coming up?
And we got an hour on that one.
You've got a minute.
So in 1 minute, look, the Coke, as a Coke system globally, as part of our global World Without Waste strategy, we've set a target for 25% of our volume to be in reuse by 2030, and we're definitely nowhere near that. So 25% globally. When you look at the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, look, we are supportive of the package. We're supportive of the fact that it includes for beverage packaging mandatory DRS, which is a good thing because it's the one thing that will definitely get beverage packaging back to be collected, and making sure that there's minimum requirements within that. We're really supportive of high recycled content targets, which sit at the heart of the PPWR. On reuse, I think it's still got a long way to go. I think that when you look at reuse, there's two specific targets that would impact beverage producers. One is for ready to drink, and then one is for beverages filled at the point of sale for takeaway. And look, I think that we are supportive of a phased transition towards reuse, but reuse has got to be seen. I think we've kind of all said the same thing in some ways. Reuse has got to be seen as complementary. It's not an and/or. It's not a black and white. You can't just say everything's got to be reused because, frankly, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for the consumer, and it's not going to support our net zero journeys. So it's definitely not a black and white. It's a bit of an and/or. We're thinking about a lot about the bottle of the future, high recycled content, no virgin-based plastic, probably a bit of plant-based material. We're also thinking about the pack mix of the future. Will probably be less single use and more reuse, but there will be single use. But the critical element is it's got to be single use within that circularity piece, and that's the goal that we've really got to focus on.
Okay, brilliant. Ola, do you want to pick up on that? And
Yeah,
also, I want to spend the last 10 minutes just talking a little bit about innovation in packaging. So I'll come to that in a second.
So picking up on what you said, and thank you for mentioning it. Plant-based cap, plant-based polyethylene, and a board, which is of course also renewable. That is how we see the future, and that's a package I'm actually having in my hand here right now. We are very much in favor of packaging waste, the packaging and the packaging waste regulation as well, as long as we take the holistic view when we talk about reuse, for example. We want to reduce the waste, obviously. We want to recycle more, and we believe that if we get help of a policy or a regulation, we will accelerate it. Absolutely, we are positive about that, and the industrial association.
But it also has to be recyclable.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. No, sorry, maybe I should have said that. Thank you. So obviously recyclable, we like renewable, and also of course collected and containing recycled materials for sure.
Brilliant. We've got about 9 or 10 minutes left. Because we like to disrupt the team here, we have got a question on the floor. But before we come to the question on the floor, I'd just like to ask the three of you to just give us some visions of what innovative packaging we're going to see in the next decade. I will put that in the context of just a couple of months ago, the Earthshot Prize winner was Nopla, that had created an edible, consumable packaging solution. Is that part of the mix, or is that only for a very, very small part of the solution? So innovations, I'll start with you, Ola, then go to Joe, then go to Alison. And then we'll have one question from the floor.
When it comes to innovation from my perspective and our company, then I mean, first of all, we believe that through innovation we can sort out a lot of the issues we see. So we're spending something like 100 million euros per year in developing a carbon neutral, fully recyclable, of course, renewable package. And I already indicated to you that we have come a quite long way, and I'm holding the package in my hand, and it's being sold in many places. What, in addition to this, it's the barrier that protects this very highly nutritional, perishable liquid foods. We have a barrier in here which we want to make out of fiber. So we are actually already now doing tests on this. So by doing that, we will have a package which all of us can be extremely proud of. So that is our aim: carbon neutral, renewable, recyclable package.
Joe?
I'll point to two things that I'm really excited about. I think, first of all, we talk a lot about, and Alison's talked a lot about the challenge of flexible plastics, hard to recycle plastics. Look, for the Coca-Cola bottle that you'll find on any shelf is always recyclable. It's easy to recycle. It's got a value. But actually, one of the things that we've been investing in, and I dare say many other FMCG companies are investing in, is enhanced or chemical recycling, which will enable us to take hard to recycle plastics and then turn them back into food grade PET that we can use again and again. And I really do think that is a bit of a game changer. Now we've got to make sure that we're not putting in place a recycling system that has a far higher energy use. We get that, and I think there are systems coming on board. We've invested in a business called Cure, which we've got really high hopes for, European based. We really believe that will deliver us food grade recycled PET that is really taking kind of hard to recycle plastics, not the easy to recycle stuff that can easily go through mechanical recycling. So that's one big innovation. I think that's going to be a really big deal within the next decade. And then the other thing, I mean, Alison touched on it before. I think that the world is ready for a lot of innovation on reuse. If I think about the reusable glass and PET lines that are in our factories, I mean, frankly, they're quite old. You know, they've been in place for 10, sometimes 20, sometimes 30 years. So I think that refillable 2.0, I think is really exciting. I don't know what that looks like. It might be much more localized. It might be much more. If you look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they've done some brilliant work around 4 definitions of reuse. Yep. And so I think that kind of reuse as a service, which Alison referred to before, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think that's going to be key, both for the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, where we do need a broad definition, but it's also going to be key for the global Coke system if we're going to get to the 25%.
Let's bring in Alison, because I'm conscious we've got a few minutes left. So a couple of thoughts on that, Alison, and then we'll come to Couple more.
Yeah, let me touch on something we haven't talked about today as it relates to innovation. So, the group here is in Europe, which has very high recycling rates, very good waste management infrastructure. I was in Mexico earlier this week, standing on top of 40 years of trash in one of the managed landfills, and visited what we call a dirty MRF, a recycling center that also has organics and everything else mixed in. So we need innovation for what we call hard to recycle materials in these markets. So how do we look at materials that won't harm nature if they leak? Because in a lot of markets in the global south, there's not the infrastructure that exists for even basic waste management. So how do we look at materials that will safely degrade in nature, in saltwater, freshwater, soil environments, safely degrade, not industrial composting, not home composting, but safely degrade in nature in a short period of time, so that we can solve for packaging in all environments, not just environments where there's well-managed waste, even though that's where we want to get to with EPR and different systems. It's going to take some time, so we have to solve for everybody on this journey. So we can't forget those in the global south when we think about innovation.
Absolutely, and I think some of you will have seen that there was a report that came out, I think just yesterday, which suggested that the Philippines is the biggest contributor of plastic waste in the oceans. So what you're suggesting, Alison, which I think is a really exciting innovation, is essentially a technology leap to effectively move away from recycling and go straight to compostability without the infrastructure that is currently required in Europe. Very interesting perspective. Joe, I know you wanted to ask, come on to that, but you did put your hand up. So if you could just very briefly ask your question, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. My name is Emmy. I work for Metabolic. We do comprehensive impact assessment and setting science-based targets for nature.
Oh, microphone's coming.
Thank you. My name is Emmy. I work at Metabolic. And my question is actually, because I think you're all doing great things, and you have a very comprehensive understanding of the problem, I think, as well. But in how far are you willing to work together as an industry? Because really, of course, packaging is also some of not just the lowest hanging fruit, but it's also the baseline of what we need to be doing, and we need to be doing it much faster. So is, for example, Coca-Cola willing to leave the proprietary bottle design? Are you willing and able to work together with PepsiCo to set up a really universal take-back system, for example? Because that would drastically, if you go across these boundaries of industry and brands, then we can really move things much faster.
Thank you, Emmy. So, in 1 minute 57, the three of you, can you describe how you're going to collaborate in the future? Joe, I'll ask you first.
I think the collaboration is fundamental. Whenever you're talking about waste systems, you're not talking about a waste system just for Coca-Cola bottles or just for Tetra Pak. I mean, we're doing a lot of work, for example, in Indonesia, where we've got a major partnership with Dynapack, which is about PT recycling. We've invested directly into that, into the PT recycling infrastructure. We're doing a lot of work locally with other brand owners to pull plastic waste through, as Alison describes, the informal waste sector. We mustn't forget about people, by the way.
Absolutely.
Look, I think we've got to make some differentiations. Some of this is competitive. Some of this is pre-competitive. When we're talking about deposit return schemes, it's a pre-competitive thing. We've just got to be all in. That's not a deposit return scheme for Coke packaging. It's a deposit return scheme for Pepsi packaging, for Iron Brew in Scotland, for all brands. And I think we've got to be really clear. Some of this is a competitive advantage, but some of it actually is we've just got to work together and work together better and quicker and faster.
Ola, do you want to add to that?
Well, partnership and collaboration is absolutely key. I can just give one example. For us, 35% of the greenhouse gases impact of our value chain comes from our raw materials and the transportation. So what have we done then? We have pooled all of these people together. So we are now covering 90% of all of those, and we work together to try to actually reduce and find new ways of working. That's just one example, and I'll be quiet now.
Thank you. Ola's left you 11 seconds, Alison. You can have a little bit more. 12.
Yeah, no, so I'm literally at the event with multiple peers and competitors. So there's a lot of collaboration. I think we've set our businesses, business differences aside and realized we have to collaborate in this space or else we're all going to lose. And we're working with a lot of other brand owners on establishing take back systems or curbside collection where they don't exist. So we've launched some of the hard to recycle curbside programs in the UK, in China. We're working with multiple peers and competitors in the US to establish that type of system. So, and it's just not peers and competitors, it's all across the supply network. So it's suppliers, universities, startups, everybody, service providers. So I think collaboration is key, even beyond our standard peer set, and absolutely necessary if we want to succeed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alison. Well, thank you very much to the three of you for a fascinating and interesting discussion. Thank you to everybody in the audience.
Thank you.